welcome to another episode of Bit by Bit. I am Ben Beharin, joined with my colleague Carolina Milanesi, and we were both just at Amazon's reInvent in Las Vegas. And interestingly, it was an event that was the main theme, even though it wasn't just around AI, came off as AI. It felt like we're sitting there and if you just looked at the track sessions and saw all the hype, you'd think we're like peak AI. But the reality is we're in the very, very early stages of that. And I think that point sometimes gets missed, that most people, most organizations are still just trying to figure out how to deploy AI. But I think there's an opportunity right now and around AI to I guess rethink some of their overall initiatives. One of those being sustainability, which I'll let you take from here. But I think that's an interesting point, right? That if an organization is sitting here now, maybe revisiting a bunch of workloads, hasn't fully embraced the cloud, but over the course of the last few years has been being more conscious about their sustainability initiatives. This is kind of that moment where all of these things now might be able to take a fresh approach, if you agree.
I agree, because as often is the case, it's easier to think about things like, how you're going to deploy AI, but more importantly, sustainability, in the same way as you do with security at the beginning of your path, than not try, middle way to try and retrofit what you're doing. And I think that, to your point about AWS reInvent and how, although it wasn't just about generative AI, how generative AI was like if we did a drinking game, we were drunk on day zero, because it was obviously top of mind with everybody. But linked to that was data and how you organize and make sense and get insights and keeps private. There was cloud and the choices that you made around cloud. And then, yes, sustainability and ethics were two other big topics. It was interesting and something that unfortunately didn't get a lot of traction as far as coverage, but Amazon did commission a third-party study just before, the week before reInvent, I think is when the results came out, around kind of a state of play today in enterprise. And some of the numbers are really interesting. And one that caught my eye in particular is that 35% of the respondents think that if you don't deploy generative AI and AI in general ethically, that can cost more than $1 million to the business, if not jeopardize the business itself. So there's actually a lot of interest and attention around ethics. And I did actually have the opportunity to record a podcast with Dia Wynn, who is the lead for responsible AI at AWS. And she was making a very valid point that, in a way, generative AI, because it feels a little scary to everyone, has actually got people to think more about ethics and about deploying the technology in the right way. Another interesting stats that came out from the study from Amazon is that half of the respondents are, so 47%, are planning to spend more, to invest more in responsible AI in 2024. Now, that could be that the base in 2023 wasn't that big, but saying 50% almost of the respondent, it's a big number, and is encouraging to see that people don't want to just take advantage of a technology for the sake of speed, but really looking at what the ramification could be if they don't do it right.
I think this point that I think is actually really interesting, not having to cover sustainability and corporate responsibility as much as you do. I was intrigued by Amazon as a theme. And I guess, we go to a lot of vendor events. I go to a lot of these vendor events with you, so the same ones. So it's not like we're at different ones. But a lot of these I feel like I noticed it more with Amazon. whether they said it or not, that their underlying approach to a lot of these solutions has that theme of responsibility, social responsibility, ethics built in. Like it wasn't like they were pivoting back to it. It's starting there from day one.
No.
And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that the reason why that is the case is two. One is that Amazon as an organization is quite unique, both in how complex their business is, right? There's so many different parts of the business, and then their size. And the two things get them to have a huge impact when it comes to sustainability. And they have done a lot of work for their own business. So I think that there's that as a, if you like, as the bedrock of how they're thinking about certain things. And then the other one is that, as it was actually Cisco's CEO that talked about doing well while doing good is a
Right.
good thing, right? So you can do well for the business and do good for the planet and society. And I think that that's where, from a reinvent perspective, and what Amazon is talking about is not just about their own business and how they can be sustainable and using, generative AI to help sustainability, which is a great point. But then there's also the fact that they can actually make money by helping their
Sure.
customers do the same. And so I think that the thread that you're talking about, which was very visible, was because there is a business opportunity for Amazon and for their partners to work in sustainability and ethical generative AI. I think the other thread that was very subtle but very present was something that you and I talked to in the opening episode of Bit by Bit, which is choice in when it comes to generative AI, right? Obviously, a clear reference to what happened with OpenAI, but that thread of choice was very, very visible throughout the conference, which then I'm sure, going to have to talk about the launch of their own tool
Yeah.
as
Yes.
far as choice is concerned.
Yeah. But I think this just beginning point reinforcing to everybody, that it feels, again, like we've run full speed for the past year, right? Yesterday was the 1 year anniversary of ChatGPT launching.
Yeah.
It's been the hype of the industry, but it's super early. I mean, we have research going right now, which is just finishing, which we will be very, very happy to share with everybody around Gen AI as it relates to organizational use and ITDMs. But some surveys I've seen from some of the larger institutions, highlight points like Gen AI is only 1% of cloud spending today, growing to maybe 2 to 3%. And the vast majority of organizations just have very basic projects going right now. So this is that opportunity to really rethink about all these things and really do digital transformation. Because, with COVID, it was like we were blindsided. We've all of a sudden got to jump to digital. So trade-offs were made. But right now, we can make these conscious decisions about how to have these things responsible, but also benefit our businesses at the same time. And so I just think it's an interesting opportunity, to approach this correctly from day one. But within this perspective that it's early, that's kind of the lens that I thought Amazon Q was very interesting in terms of what they were launching, because they make it feel like it's really, it's your business assistant to help you make decisions within Amazon's platform, right? And some of the assumptions there, which I think start with AI, because this is the right point, right? You're totally right. Amazon's doubling down, and I think their primary competitive position against Azure and Google Cloud is breadth and depth of choice. I just feel like that's where they're going to hang their hat and continue to double down on. But within all of that choice, sometimes it's hard to make decisions. So you need something to help you decide, which language model, which silicon instance to run, right? Can I get GPUs, or should I train on my model on something else like their custom silicon in Trainium? And that's kind of the lens I viewed Q is it's early onboarding relative to Amazon's platforms as a whole, but some parts of Gen AI, and trying to make it really easy for people to sift through those decisions and get that kind of assistant. And so I think super relevant, this product, given kind of where we're at now at this very early stage of AI.
I thought it was interesting as well, and obviously there are reasons why that is the case. And the first one is that Amazon doesn't, or AWS doesn't have a productivity suite, and because of that, all their examples of Q and where is relevant to your point is about making sense of your business. And then as you make sense of your business and the data that you have and the workflows that you have, you reinvent your business. That was kind of the opening keynote remarks were all about how you reinvent yourself, first with the cloud, now with AI, and really rethink your business. And I think that the ability to allow you to pick and choose best of breed to some extent, and that flexibility of choice allows you to do that maybe in in a way that for some companies that are not fully immersed in one ecosystem is going to be easier. And I was trying to make sense, and I said on X that think about Copilot with choice. That's kind of how it feels like.
Right, right. Well, and I think this point is super interesting because, I mean, and I tweeted too similarly that I agree, right? One model is not going to
You
rule them
axed,
all.
Ben. You
No,
axed.
no, I refuse to call it. It will always be Twitter. But don't worry, it's my vernacular. It's not going to change. But at the same time, I also don't think there's going to be a bazillion models. Like I do
Yeah.
think it will land, and even on Amazon's slide, right? They've got their own Titan model. They're supporting Stability. They're supporting Anthropic. They're supporting Llama. And then so they're already saying like there's some really good foundational models out there. So within this choice of say it consolidates to I don't know 3 or 5 maybe, here's what you might need, right? And a good example, which sort of came up in some of the track sessions, was where we're seeing, and I think where everybody's seeing at least the initial interest with generative AI is in call center. Okay, well, there
Mhm.
might be a model that's just very perfectly tuned for call center. And so if you know that and you say, this is the model that's been proven to work for call center, take it, now train your data on it, your call center data on it, and deploy a fine-tuned model. That's great for a business who may not know that, right? That will help lead them to those decisions. But Amazon didn't come out and say this, but what I thought was interesting from some of the research out there about where Amazon has got customers and where Microsoft with Azure has been growing customers is that Amazon has typically dominated this early adopter tier of enterprises. So
Mm.
people who know what they want. They're technical. This is startups. This is more lean, innovative, kind of early companies. 100% will always be on AWS. Where Microsoft's share has grown over the past 2 years is from those later stage businesses. So businesses who are not as progressive, but also more maybe already in Microsoft's ecosystem, big subscribers to Office 365, and now they have correct onboarding, but they need more hand holding. Like that's the point. And that's why I thought Q is kind of subtly interesting, is that it brings a value proposition to those businesses where I think Microsoft's really been gaining share with Azure, and provides that similar kind of hand holding and onboarding with, again, the breadth of choice that Amazon offers. So subtly, I thought that was really strategic, even though they didn't come out and say that's why they're doing this. I think that will have positive implications for them on these kind of later stage, middle of the adopting and later stage businesses as they now start to move to adopt cloud and Gen AI based workflows.
I thought it was also interesting that as much as the conversation was about generative AI, there was almost like a cautionary line that all the speakers were integrating in their keynotes, which was not everything has to be generative AI, right? And
Right.
so being smart about what you run where and what requires generative AI and what doesn't, uh, is important. And I appreciated them making that point, because I think at times it feels we're getting overexcited and we're putting queries into chat GPT instead of picking up a calculator and actually working 2 + 2 = 4. So I think that some not caution because there is a risk, but more that from a cost perspective and a sustainability perspective, we would be inconsiderate if we put everything into a generative AI query.
Totally agree, and I think to emphasize that point, right, and your point and kind of what I said go hand in hand here, where most businesses, I think the latest stats I saw holistically was like only 30% of most businesses' workflows run in the cloud already, right? So there's already a huge number still of workloads that companies are looking to offload into cloud-based workflows. So that has nothing to do with Gen AI. That's just modernizing systems, adapting for scale, preparing for your business growth, like all the things that public cloud hyperscalers provide to you. So there's that first and foremost, right? What we're talking about competitively, Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud are competing for new business workflows of that now, 70% that's left. It's even smaller, right, relative to AI, but those two things kind of onboard together. And I think if you look at my sort of initial point that call it the first, I'm making this up, but you'll see where I'm going in terms of business adopters. That first 20%, right, of aggressive business early adopting enterprises are the most aggressive toward public cloud, which is really what you've seen. This next stage is where everybody's competing for, and that's where AI can start to initiate some of that and then move to other workloads that aren't just AI. But I think the point that I think is really interesting is the way you compete for this next segment of these new customers is very different than where Amazon has won this business by default for the past 6-7 years.
It was also interesting that Amazon is also entering a new field which we haven't seen them before, which is the thin client business, where during the show they released basically what is a Fire TV cube adapted and kind of rethought and re-engineered to be a thin client for enterprise. And you and I had the opportunity to have a chat with them on this. I thought it was really interesting that they are taking that cloud first approach for some business and finding an opportunity to deliver value at the endpoint for managing for them and deploying for organizations that might be a little bit more interested in or cautious about remote workers and asset deployment and
Right.
management and retrieval. So that's a new play for them, which makes a lot of sense in a world where, if you're thinking about generative AI, we will see workflows that are split between the cloud and the endpoint.
Right. And I think it's a good point too. And also kind of comes back to this. How are they trying to go after even new customer pain points or new customers, right? And really bring those customers into Amazon's ecosystem with as many sort of points as possible. But that exact, I think, is a good segue into this. How do we think about the competitive implications for others? Because you made the great point, and I just think this in general, needs to have a fleshing out of what this means is that Microsoft has Windows and has Office, and they're building Copilot fully into that stack. Amazon doesn't have anything like that. Google does, obviously, with Workspace, and so they've got some of these end customer enterprise focused services and software, and Amazon doesn't have that. And I think thinking through, how much of a strategic issue is that is a relevant point, because I don't know. You brought it up, and I think it's a good one. I think other people mentioned it too. It feels like this, like you said, this is their Copilot for AWS services, but that can't go all the way to the end client. And I think I'm curious how that works itself out and how Amazon goes over that, because I do feel like, at least for Azure and GCP, there is some competitive advantage to having end client enterprise software.
I agree with you, but I wonder if there's two different play. So right now, if you think about Duet and Copilot, the conversation is still, yes, we see the value, and as an end user, so the employees see the value, But from an enterprise perspective, there's still the question of, am I prepared to pay $30
Yeah.
for that? Which is ridiculous, let me say that, right? Because if as an employee, I'm not worth $30, I should be better off somewhere else, right? But obviously is not $30. It's $30 time how many employees you have, right? So the cost becomes something to be considered. But the question of that value is still there. I think if you're focusing like AWS is on reinventing your business and so empowering that backend to deliver more value, I think that's harder to fight against, right? So it's easier to justify that, and not to say that Google and Microsoft don't have that, because they obviously, especially if you're looking at Copilot, is very well embedded in applications. It's targeting verticals and different roles within the organization, from HR to sales. So they had that too. My point is simply, I don't know how much having that endpoint on the employee side from a productivity perspective really adds to the overall appeal versus an AWS that doesn't have it.
Right. And I think this was brought up too, which, in the cloud services conversation, there's a debate around multi-cloud. Could you have some workflows at a hyperscaler and some at another? And this question came up to Adam Saplinski, and he didn't say like, no, we're not fully supporting, but Amazon obviously has to be able to balance those workflows. A good example of this is, there's some software that I use, and this is an AI point, not an overall cloud workflow point, but I have software from a company that is running on AWS, so gives me options for language models like Claude from Anthropic, and Palm and others, but it's running on that backend, but also offers me ChatGPT, because even though they're not on Azure, ChatGPT offers those service wrappers and APIs from OpenAI. So they just include those API calls from their existing service. And so there's a way to still use these things. And I think multi-cloud could evolve into some of these. But I am just curious, like, I mean, the root of my point is, does this AI ish infrastructure decisions lead to some form of lock-in, I guess, is kind of like,
Mm,
because if I'm thinking through this, right, if I'm any of those companies, I'm sitting there going, no, I'd rather you use my full stack. Like, that's what I'm
right.
competing for. I get the best margins, and I get lock-in, and you're never leaving me. So I kind of look at it from that same lens as well. And that's where my interest is peaked, as to where do these things take you in more of kind of an enterprise lock-in, so that you're not leaving. And then again, developers becomes a relevant point to the platform. You want all those developers on your backend. So there's a part of that too that I think is interesting. But we don't have an answer, but I like this debate because it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that part of that would also be linked to data and how easy it is for you to bring data together so that your AI can be smarter, right? And so the flexibility of how you can import safely and privately data and connect data so that those decisions and suggestions are fully informed and intelligent, I think will also lead people to make different decisions.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. The last bit of news that I think it'd be worth hitting on, because it covers a couple of these themes as well, is Amazon's continuing to double down on their own custom silicon. And while what was interesting to me, and this goes back to some of your sustainability points, is the one, when I talked to those teams, the one thing that really kept coming out when I kept saying, like, what's the advantage you want to keep pushing here with your own silicon, it really did come down to lower energy, which
Yeah.
which has a sustainability cost, but also a lower business cost, right? To your point of bringing economic value with do good for the world at the same time, that they can actually bring you the same level competitively of performance needs at much lower costs and much lower energy. And those are the vectors they're going to try to compete on, I think is really interesting. But when I was talking about this with other people, they, broadly in peripheral conversations, they kept coming up, well, is Graviton really competitive with the things that Intel or AMD can come out with, which is a good point, or is Trainium or Inferentia really competitive with GPUs from NVIDIA, right, that people are lining up for. And I think this point gets missed, which we've talked about and we'll continue to talk about, that most businesses are not training 2 trillion parameter models like OpenAI is or Claude is. They're going to bring a small set of data and they're going to need to train and fine tune that. That does not require an NVIDIA H100 from, I think Trainium, right? Or what Microsoft's doing with Maya down the line, like those things will be plenty sufficient for a medium to somewhat large business to just train a basic model on. And I think we get lost in that these organizations will have relatively basic compute needs. And that's where, but they do care about cost. And that's where I think some of those advantages in these custom silicon announcements will really bear their most fruit.
I agree, and cost and to your point, sustainability are now so intertwined because the cost of electricity, and we've seen this very clearly in Europe, that the skeptics that got to pay attention to sustainability somewhat late really perked up as the cost for electricity went through the roof in Europe. And so I think you'll see more of that. It'll be interesting to see how much more transparency we're going to have on the consumption side for generative AI, because as much as we've been talking about using Gen AI to help sustainability, because there's a lot that can be done. There was a really awesome sustainability showcase at the event, and one of the use cases that they had was using generative AI to train for fires. And so basically, feeding a lot of different data points, including pictures of fires across different areas, and being able to then use that to prevent, to estimate if the conditions, weather, terrain, dryness of the trees and what have you, will lead to better fire prevention. And then also, how you go about then extinguishing the fires and doing all of that. So there's definitely a lot there of opportunity from a sustainability perspective, but there's also cost. And so I think that one of the things that, for instance, Amazon did last year was to come up with a playbook for sustainability. So what do you do? How do you think about running your business sustainably? And now they're doing the same thing for ethical AI. And so they're actually coming up with guardrails that are helping customers to think about deploying and then using, designing and deploying generative AI in a ethical manner. And something that I've been thinking about more and more is that as we talk more about generative AI and fairness and ethics, we cannot leave the sustainability point out. You can't say that you're deploying ethically if you're not thinking about the consequences and the consumption of power, and therefore the carbon footprint that you're generating through the models. And I think that we'll see certainly more need of transparency in that space.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, that's a wrap for AWS reInvent. I was thinking, in not that your sweater is a necessarily Christmas sweater, but I missed my opportunity to wear a Christmas sweater or even an obnoxious one, despite Microsoft not sending me one this year, which you could have wore your
I
Green
know.
Ghost
I
sweater.
will. I'm actually publishing later today. I didn't want to make you
Next.
feel bad by wearing mine.
No, it's fine. Everyone gives you everything, and I get to watch you use it. But I will next time wear a Christmas sweater for what we record the next time prior to Christmas, and everyone can see my glorious sweater collection. So, thanks for
Yeah.
listening, everybody. Until next time.